Hey folks, Seth Explains here. As we watch cities burn, statues being torn down, and calls to defund the police, if you haven't already, it may be time to think about personal protection. Guns Etc. has 10,200 square feet of guns, ammo, safes, and a staff that will work with you to find the best firearm for your situation. So stop by their huge store in Mesa or click on gunsetc.com and have access to over $400 million in firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy August 5th. Do you sometimes think you live in a world that's been invaded by body and brain snatchers, and that others around you are pod people just living emotionless or brainless as the culture around them says north is south, and east is west, and black is white, and white is black? I was thinking about this as I watched so many good people just going along with a narrative here that makes no factual sense and betrays understandings most of us thought controlled the human experience. Oprah Winfrey grows up in dire poverty in the segregated South. So poor she wears potato sacks for dresses. Today she's wealthier than Ted Turner and Ross Perot Jr. and every white man who is ever the president of the United States. She now has a series hosted by and in partnership with Apple, one of the 5 biggest, wealthiest companies in the world. It's entitled The Oprah Conversations. Yesterday, she hosted a conversation titled Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. That man was Emmanuel Acho, a former professional football player, net worth millions. The topic, white privilege. There, Oprah Winfrey stated, quote, "No matter where they are on the rung or the ladder of success, white people still have their whiteness. Whites have a leg up. You still have your whiteness. That's what the term white privilege is. It means that whiteness still gives you an advantage, no matter. It is the fundamental issue," close quote. Race is the fundamental issue, and no matter what or how you are born, it's going to define you. By what definition, in a more racist and race-conscious society of the 1950s, would one have predicted Miss Winfrey would be one of the most powerful and wealthiest people in the world? By what definition, in an increasingly less racist and race-conscious society of the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, would one have predicted that the single best way to propel a book and author to national or international attention would be to have Miss Winfrey wave her scepter over it? By what definition, in a yet decreasingly racist society, would one have predicted that Miss Winfrey could create other television hosts, particularly national hosts, who are people of color, by nurturing and sponsoring them? By what definition of a society where the fundamental issue in our society is the purported handicap of being born to the wrong race do you predict a man of that race to have a national or international conversation sponsored by one of the world's largest companies, where you get to be taken seriously for saying, as Mr. Acho said yesterday, quote, "Here's what I told my friends with their white children. Y'all live in a white cul-de-sac, in a white neighborhood, in a white city, in a white state. If you're not careful, your children will live their whole life white, and at the ages of 26, 27, they'll end up being part of the problem because you just let them and allowed them to live a completely white, sheltered, and cultureless life." Acho continued, "As a black person, white people, the proverbial phrase of white people, they run America. CEOs, Fortune 500 companies, execs, ownership, they run America. Not an individual white person, but collective white people," close quote. Did you catch all that? Your children will live their whole life white, and as such will predictably and certainly be part of the problem, and will live a cultureless life. White people, by dint of their being born that way, will A, be part of society's problem, and B, live cultureless. Do I need to point out the dripping contempt and racism here? To borrow from Bill Barr, is that okay now? Is that what we do now? We can just condemn people of a certain race now for being cultureless, for being part of a problem? We do that now? And we define a culture by the composition of the skin color of its practitioners or members? So that if there's a white culture, that is cultureless. There must be a black culture, and that culture is full and vibrant and rich and positive. You know how this works. Such lumping, such aggregation, we put Larry Elder and Thomas Sowell and Herman Cain in the same culture as, I don't know, Tupac Shakur and Malcolm X. We can put Oprah Winfrey in the same culture as any number of black women whose names one never heard of. We can, of course, put Lee Harvey Oswald and James Earl Ray in the same culture as Joe Biden and Tim Cook. We can put Jerry Nadler in the same culture as Donald Trump and Ben Shapiro in the same culture as Rachel Maddow. If you're not careful, Mr. Acho reminds us, you could end up living in a white cul-de-sac and your children could live their whole life white. I honestly don't even know what that second part means. I do understand the first part. It's called segregation. The very legal and moral environment Oprah Winfrey herself worked hard to egress from, but the very moral environment we watch trying to reconcretize itself with black dorms and separate graduation ceremonies. This is more than just rare. As a report last year from the National Association of Scholars found, last year, they wrote, a student newspaper at Williams College endorsed affinity housing for black students and other minorities, which is to say it endorsed segregation. The students claim segregation will make Williams, quote, a more welcoming, supportive, and safe community for minoritized students, close quote. Surveying 173 schools, we found that 42% offer segregated residences, 46% offer segregated orientation programs, and 72% host segregated graduation ceremonies. We call this neo-segregation, the voluntary and institutionally sanctioned segregation of minority students in the post-Brown versus Board era. It all conforms to a pernicious trend that goes back to the 1960s, not long after Jim Crow segregation was banned under federal law. The first neo-segregated residence our research identified was the Malcolm X House at Wesleyan University. So much for the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision and the reinvigorated civil rights movement that spurred American colleges and universities by the early 1960s to engage in a good faith effort to achieve racial integration. So much for what we thought was not only progress, but the American dream where people such as Oprah Winfrey can do better than her employers of a different race or culture, or as can Mr. Acho by beginning his life attending one of the most elite prep schools in America. Jeff Jacoby wrote something I thought we should or could all be pretty proud of, regardless of race or culture. In 1958, 40% of white Americans polled by Gallup said that if a black person came to live next door, they would be likely to move. By 1978, only 13% still said that. By 1997, 1%. That's only one measure of racism's profound decline here. Friendship is another. In 1964, a mere 18% of white Americans claimed to have a friend who was black. 4 decades later, Gallup found that proportion of interracial friendships had more than quadrupled. 82% of whites said they had close non-white friends, and 88% of blacks reporting having close friends who were not black. How in the world, one may ask, did a state that was 91% white, like Iowa, ever put its electoral votes into the election of one Barack Obama were it not for this kind of progress, and were it not for this kind of reproof and disapprobation of everything Mr. Acho and Miss Winfrey are saying here? To say nothing of the country that took the very white John McCain and Mitt Romney privilege as meaningless over and against a black man she called the one. Oh, and she called him that in Iowa, of all places. So what in the hell are we saying here? And what are the implications, if anything, other than A, race determines thought, never mind culture, and B, that thought and culture are permanent as the immutability of race? It's not like one can change their race, as they evidently can now change their gender. We don't have that movement. Oh, one can try, I suppose, as Rachel Dolezal tried, but she was condemned by whites and blacks alike. Here's the thing, which is why I spoke of body and brain snatchers. We all just kind of go along with this. Some pseudo-sophisticates will even hear these kinds of talks and conversations as take place between Winfrey and Acho and say, I never thought of it like that. That is so true. The reason they never thought of it like that, of course, is that it's not worth thinking about. It's madness, posturing, or imposing as enlightened thought. Thurgood Marshall put it this way. In the short run, it may seem to be the easier course to allow our great metropolitan metropolitan areas to be divided up each into two cities, one white, the other black. But it is a course I predict our people will ultimately regret." Close quote. Never mind great metropolitan areas. What of a great, or our whole country, or our whole country's thinking and train of thought? It seems it's been snatched, and not in a good way. I still stand with what I thought was right, well enough put by Justice John Marshall Harlan in his dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson. And do note yet again, the Winfrey and Ocho view is that of the majority in what we were all taught was a wrong and disgraceful opinion in the Plessy case. Harlan wrote in the dissent, "I thought we all thought better than the majority opinion this. The sure guarantee of the peace and security of each race is the clear, distinct, unconditional recognition by our governments, national and state, of every right that inheres in civil freedom and of the equality before the law of all citizens of the United States without regard to race. To do otherwise can have no other result than to render permanent peace impossible and to keep alive a conflict of races, the continuance of which must do harm to all concerned." Can we once and for all please put the conflict of races to death here in America? I thought we were on our way. But junk thought dressed up as intellectually enlightened keeps derailing us. And it is derailing us in the most insidious of ways, re-endorsing the history of America as told by the majority decision in Dred Scott, re-endorsing the ethic of separation and segregation as told by the majority decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, and reversing the notion of Brown v. Board of Education, which is at the time unanimous and celebrated. Folks, it's not just the reasoning and philosophical propinquity with such terrible majority decisions as Plessy v. Ferguson, which gave us the underpinnings of segregation for some 70 years. Oprah directly contradicts its dissent. Directly. There, in dissent, what we thought was the good guys, Justice Harlan wrote, quote, "In the view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant ruling class of citizens. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind, and neither knows nor tolerates classes among the citizens." Close quote. But Oprah Winfrey yesterday says there is a caste system in America. Directly, that's what she said. There is a caste system in America. Again, right in league with the segregationists we all used to abhor. But it shows Oprah simply doesn't know history any more than she knows English. You cannot, ipso facto, leave, depart from, egress from a caste system. It's a permanent thing. And yet somehow I don't see her still wearing potato sack dresses. This fair isn't all just junk thought. This isn't just retrograde. It's moral recidivism. I think it will fail, but I worry. I'm Seth Leibson. The lines are open.